I have to write on my notes, turn recording on, because I always forget. Right, we're actually finishing this morning on our series from the book of Exodus. And the bit I'm covering today, it sort of fits a little bit into our next topic. And if you're interested, our next sort of series is going to be on spiritual warfare and the armour of God. So hopefully that will be good. You might have realised I'm going to be reading from chapter 17, and hopefully you know that the book of Exodus has got a few more chapters than 17. And we haven't touched on the last 20 chapters at all. I mean, we've missed things out, such as Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments. We've not even touched on those. I don't know. There's a little bit of an interesting fact for you here. Did you know that Moses was the first person to download from the cloud onto a tablet? I don't know if you knew that. We've missed out God's newest covenant, the one that He confirmed with the nation of Israel. We've missed out the Ark of the Covenant, but obviously there's Raiders of the Lost Ark to watch that if you're interested about that. I'm sure that's incredibly biblically correct. We haven't touched on the consecration of priests, the beginning of God laying down the law, such as the rules of sacrifice and not worshipping idols. We haven't even covered the golden calf, have we? And, Moses turns his back for 1 second, doesn't he? And they all, they make this idol and they all start to worship it. So, and it's not as if we would be, worshipping any idols today, would we? We don't constantly look at our mobile phones, do we? Or think we've got to get back and watch England play football today, do we? So we don't. We don't. Of course we don't. We don't do that. And finally, there's the building of the tabernacle. And this was a place where God chose to reveal His presence. And it was a significant place of worship for the Israelites. So there's lots we haven't covered, but like all good mini-series, keep them wanting more to come back for season 2. So you never do know, we might pick up a few of those things at a later date. But anyway, today we're talking about the story of the Amalekites in Exodus. And that's from chapter 17 of Exodus, and I'm just going to read from verses 8 to 16. So chapter 17, verse 8 to 16. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men to go out and fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses has ordered, and Moses, Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Then, when the Lord said to Moses, "Write on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, "Because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war with the Amalekites from generation to generation." So, like I said at the beginning, this story sort of ties in quite nicely to our next topic. of spiritual warfare and the armour of God. I mean, one thing that I believe that's happening here is that Moses, along with the help of Aaron and Hur, are engaging in a sort of spiritual battle. Even though they have no direct involvement in the actual physical fighting, their actions are clearly the reason why the Israelites are winning. But more about that next week. Today I want to focus on the aspect of Moses having to raise his hands towards God. And what exactly has that got to do with us in the here and now? In our world today, isn't it, we have the raising of our hand or hands. It can mean so many different things, can't it? We can raise our hand to gain attention, can't we, for the purpose of asking a question. When we were very young, in school, we might have raised our hand to ask the teacher to go to the toilet. You don't have to do that here, by the way, just go. And I remember raising my hand in class once. I think I was about 5, and the assembly had just started, and the teacher thought I needed to go to the toilet, but they thought, Gary, that Winson boy, he can wait, it's only going to be 10 minutes, so I put my hand down. Anyway, after the lesson, sorry, you can go to the toilet. I don't want to go to the toilet. My tooth has just fallen out and I'm bleeding. I think there's a lesson here somewhere about not coming to quick judgments, but I don't know. We'll move quickly on. Anyway, raising of the hands can be a sign of surrendering to the enemy, or showing a police officer that you're unarmed, can't it? Before you get tasered or something like that. Also, raising of the hand or hands can be a prelude, can't it, to striking down on someone or something. Robert Orban, a writer, he once said, never raise your hand to your children. It leaves your midsection completely unprotected. Raising of the hands can mean many different things, but today I want to touch on its place in worship and prayer. Moses was almost certainly praying to God when he raised his hands, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that he was also worshipping God on top of the hill as well, with the staff and everything else. And there are many references in the Bible to do with raising of your hands. We have the one that I've just read in Exodus. Psalm 143 says, I stretch out my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land. In 2 Chronicles, then he, that's Solomon, knelt on his knees in the presence of the assembly of Israel and spread out his hands towards heavens. Psalm 63, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. And in Nehemiah and Ezra, bless the Lord, the great God. And all the people answered, Amen, Amen, lifting up their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshipped the Lord with their faces to the ground. A lot of biblical verses about raising of hands are mainly to do with prayer. But considering that prayer in itself is a form of worship, then I don't think any sort of rigid distinction can be made between the two. Both Moses praying and worshipping God at the same time. Before I get into the significance of Moses having to keep his hands aloft, I first want to put something to bed straight away. I'm not prescribing. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not even suggesting that when you worship or pray that you should raise your hands. Or in fact, do anything such as stand, sit, kneel, close your eyes, clap, lay prostrate on the floor, if you want to do that. I may have a problem with, flag waving, No, I haven't really, no, I don't. But you'll have to bring one in that's white, won't you? And then that will show you your act of surrender, won't it? But I'm not prescribing for you to be doing anything at all, and that's important. Richard Foster, he's an author of a book called Celebration of Discipline, an absolute excellent book, which I highly recommend for you to read. And he said this about worship: we can use all the right techniques and methods. We can have the best possible liturgy, but we have not worshipped the Lord until spirit touches spirit. That's the Spirit of God touching our spirit. And if we only treat the raising of our hands, among other things, as a technique, then we miss the point. Worship is from our spirit. It's from our heart. And if anyone, and that's particularly worship leaders, try to coerce or manipulate you into doing something that they think would help your worship, then what you end up doing is a performance, and that has absolutely no value in worship at all. So, over the next few weeks, if all of a sudden there are worship songs that talk about lifting holy hands or falling on your knees, then please feel free in Christ to completely ignore doing that. I assure you, I have not included those songs to try and manipulate the situation. So getting back to the reading, why did Moses have to keep his hands raised for the Israelites to win the battle? Well, firstly, and I've already said that raising of one hand can be seen as an act of surrender. The world seems to have sort of, got this one right, haven't they? But Moses wasn't surrendering to the enemy. Far from it. The human hands, can't they? They give so much visible expression to so many of our beliefs, feelings, intentions. When we're angry, we could clench our fists. When we're afraid, we can use it to cover our faces. When frustrated, throw them wildly in the air or trying to explain ourselves, I don't know. And when we're worried, we can wring our hands. But when we lift them, it can be a symbolic gesture of yielding to God's will. We are submitting to his guidance and power. I surrender, Lord. God, I am yours to do with as you please. And when we lift our hands to God, we are surrendering not to an enemy, but to someone who is on our side, to God. And of course, there are many other things we can do, such as kneeling, to show to God our acts of surrendering to him. And secondly, if we raise our hands, it can also be a sign of our need and our dependence. In its simplest form, by reaching out, we are visibly displaying our need for God to touch our lives. A show of our need for his love and his grace and his mercy. Our need to know that he is here, ever present. And as we reach out to him, we're only doing what God is already doing himself. He is already here, already there, 24/7, reaching out to us and saying, take my hand. I desire you to come close and fellowship with me. God doesn't have a need like we do, but you can be 100% sure that God has the desire to take our hands. And how can we be sure of that? Well, if that wasn't the case, then why would he send his son Jesus Christ to die for us? We reach out like one who wants to receive a gift. Father, I gratefully embrace all that you want to give, because I need Jesus. I need your Spirit, because without you, I am completely spiritually bankrupt. We are confessing and showing our utter dependence on God by reaching out to him. I rely on your strength alone to preserve me, to sustain me, to deliver me. Thirdly, raising of our hands can, and this is probably a common one, isn't it? A sign of reverence and awe. A sign of reverence and awe towards God. And it also can be an outward expression of showing our vulnerability to the Lord as well. We are showing God that he is so much more than we can ever imagine. We say, in my vulnerability, Lord, I come to you, open-handed, concealing nothing, saying, I have nothing to hide, I am holding nothing back. The physical expression of declaring the greatness of God and our vulnerability to him has importance. And of course we can do that in many ways, but a physical declaration such as raising of the hands, among other things, could help us in this process. As Christians, we're not Gnostics. What's a Gnostic? Gnosticism, both in its ancient and modern form, disparages the body. It says that the body is totally evil and corrupt and should be kept in check. The body is only a temporary prison for one's soul, and that it must not defile the pure praise of one's spirit. Gnosticism endorses almost exclusively the spiritual dimension, because there's nothing is good in our physical reality. This, of course, is complete nonsense, as there are countless Bible references for using our bodies in worship, and raising of the hands is just one example of that. Another is when King David, he danced, didn't he? He danced naked before the Lord. And if for some strange reason you're not sure, dancing naked is not allowed as we gather here on a Sunday. The Apostle Paul says in the book of Romans chapter 12, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Paul, I know Paul here is mainly speaking here of offering ourselves to God and engaging in the world around us. But this verse, it does act as a good reminder that we are not Gnostics. The physical body is not to be dismissed. We use all our minds, all our spirits, all our bodies to show our reverence, awe, and vulnerability towards God. And obviously, raising of the hands is just a tiny aspect of doing that. And lastly, I think the most relevant to Moses' circumstance here is that the raising of his hands had real power. It wasn't just symbolism, it did have real power. And of course the power, it was all from God, but God chose to channel that power through Moses' actions. It never ceases to amaze me that God chooses us, doesn't he, to achieve his plans and his purposes. And that's just incredible. The battle against the Israelites, won, against the Amalekites was not due to their physical effort in fighting, even though it was part of the plan. The only physical effort which secured victory was Moses keeping his hands up, and the effort of Aaron and her helping him to do so. And that's another lesson for us, isn't it? You know, the importance and the need of each of us supporting and relying on each other. All of us having an important part to play in furthering God's kingdom here on earth. And if that's just holding somebody's hands up, it's important. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that if we start to raise our hands, battles will be won like Moses did. And I would expect that any battles we face are most likely to be spiritual ones than actually physical fighting. However, I haven't been on a night out in Skegness for a while, so I'm not quite sure about that, but you never do know. I think spiritual battles rather than fighting. Now, you may or may not agree with me, and that's fine either way, but I believe, real things happen in the spiritual realm when we proclaim and declare who God is, when we reach out to God, when we physically surrender to his plans and purposes for us and the world. Sort of like when Moses raised his hands, God's power somehow channeled through our actions in the spiritual realm. And even if you don't fully endorse or agree with that, one thing for sure is that even though our hearts and minds are of vital importance, we must not completely forget the power of physical expression in our worship and prayer to God. Finally, there was a Christian pastor called Sam Storms. Oh, I want a name like that. Sam Storms. I've not made it up, it's brilliant, isn't it? I love that. And he said, why do you assume that the appropriate place for your hands is at your side and you need an explicit biblical warrant for raising them? Wouldn't it be just as reasonable to assume that the appropriate place for one's hands is the lifting of hands towards heaven, calling for an explicit biblical warrant other than gravity or physical exhaustion to keep them low? Of course, there are many other things apart from us raising our hands to show our surrender to God, our dependence on God, our reverence and awe for God, our vulnerability towards God, our need for God. And thankfully, we have the freedom in Jesus Christ to use all, some, or none of them. And I'll repeat that again. We have the freedom in Jesus to use all, some, or none of them. But what a mystery it is. God, through Moses, won the battle by just a simple act of keeping one's hands raised. It was a clear demonstration of God's power and not Joshua's ability in fighting. A demonstration that a simple act of reaching out to God with a little help from his friends, victory would be achieved. Maybe today there's a cause to pause and think. How do we physically express ourselves to God, towards God, so that victory can be achieved in the battles that we want to fight? Remembering that nothing should be done as some technique, but the mind, the spirit, our emotions, and not forgetting the body. They should all be laid on the altar in our real acts of spiritual worship and prayer to God. Let's pray.